session for the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners for March 5th, 2025. Today, we're going to continue with the next step in the series of department overviews. And today it will be our district attorney and the sheriff's office. These work sessions, we do not vote on any items here at work sessions. They're for informational purposes only. We do not take public comment at our work sessions, but if you have any public comment based on what you heard this afternoon, you're welcome to join us at 5:30 and provide your comments during our public comment session. So with that, we think we're getting set up. The sheriff is getting his PowerPoint ready. Dakota, good to see you. Welcome, everybody. Dakota, do you want to introduce?
Love to.
You have to hit the button on the microphone, and so it turns green, yellow. I don't know. Green is the color that we're looking for. Green is go.
Working with a 3-year-old right now. Lisa Moore is with me today. Lisa is our chief of staff. She helped put together our informational presentation today and is running, for all practical purposes, the office, all the operations, grants, media, anything and everything that is kind of external and internal that's not legal is going through Lisa. So the way the office is working right now, I'd be kind of over all of legal stuff with David Greenwald's our deputy. So when I'm not around, David's handling all of that. And then all the other good fun stuff, operations, personnel, everything like that goes through Lisa. So that's the division right now. And Lisa's joined us from New Mexico. She used to work with me. She's actually a master social work clinician. And so kind of, we'll get into it in our presentation a bit, but that goes along with what we're trying to do in the office as well going forward. Give you enough time, Jay? Huh? They give you enough time to get set up? Like, there you go.
I know. We should be. Okay, so I'm Jay Armbruster, Douglas County Sheriff. I've been with the Douglas County Sheriff's Office for coming up on 27 years, but I am entering my 5th year, 2nd term as your sheriff. So I put together, I've adapted a presentation that I give around the community, and I've tried to adapt it kind of a 30,000-foot view of the sheriff's office. Feel free, this is interactive. Any questions, anything like that? I will kind of hustle through it because I want to leave Dakota enough time, but I'll also touch on a few things. I always like to start with just a little bit of a historical piece about your sheriff and the sheriff. As you can see there, so in the old days in England, they had tracts and parcels of land that would be what we would call a county today. They were referred to as a shire, and the king would appoint one person to settle, to collect taxes, settle disputes, and make arrests. And he was that person. That person was an agent of the king. Whereas when the founding fathers established the office of sheriff, they made it an agent of the people. So I'm, as you all know, but those of you that are listening at home, I am the only law enforcement that is directly elected by the people. Statutorily, the Kansas sheriffs, we are required to keep the jail, serve all court papers, and to keep the peace, which is pretty broad, overarching. The very first sheriff of Douglas County in 1855 was founded under a pro-slavery governor, and this guy was the postmaster from Westport, Missouri, and he was the very first sheriff, and he actually led a raid to burn down the Free State Press and the Free State Hotel. And he actually quit the job 2 years later because the governor wouldn't give him enough balls and chains to hold the Free State prisoners that he wanted held. So I always like to tell people that the very first version of me was a domestic terrorist. So downtown, obviously, we have a patrol division, which is still shorthanded. We are funded for 29, I believe. We run with about 22 right now, but we are a unique agency where we are like a tube of toothpaste where we fill at the bottom and squeeze it up to the top, and we fill at the jail and then work them up through the ranks and out to patrol. And we are currently working through that, but that takes time. But we actually, given the pay raises that you all, the commission gave us 2 years ago, we are nearly fully staffed, which is amazing. I threw fleet in here just because it's become such a big part of what we do. Our fleet has expanded exponentially, but also just for you all the cost. I threw in there that in 2019 and 2020, I'm sorry, that should have been not 22. Dodge Durangos were $31,000, which was our preferred vehicle. As of today, we're buying them for $48,000, and the Ford F-150s are $55,000. We have talked in the past about EVs, and I'm more than happy to broach that topic at any time. But we'll just kind of skip over for today. But we are tracking that. Our investigation division is not very big. It's about 5 full-time. We also have a drug enforcement part. We refer to them as the Nexus unit. We've kind of moved away from the drug enforcement model that we had in the 90s and 2000s, and we move more towards targeting the crime that is associated with drug trade. So a good example over the last few years was catalytic converter thefts were almost exclusively being stolen, sold, and then the money used for drugs. So we were targeting that crime particularly in order to affect and disrupt the drug trade. Court security, we have 9 courts currently. We're obviously, I'm pretty sure most of you know that we're building onto the building next door, and we're going to up that to like 12, I think it was 12 courts. So we currently only have 7 deputies in there. We had over 64,000 individual walk through our checkpoint during the calendar year of 2024, a staggering number to me. But as we move forward, we're obviously going to be coming back to you to talk more about a little bit more court security staffing just to keep that new building secure. Our civil process, 2.5 deputies, 1 part-time and 2 full-time. They served over almost 8,000 documents last year. That's everything from stalking orders, perfection, PFS, PFA, which is protection from stalking, protection from abuses, all the way down to summonses and writs for small claims court and that kind of stuff. Our warrant division, the numbers, I just couldn't quite get them ready for you today. But it's somewhere around, there was around 2,000 warrants issued last year and about 1,700, not just the ones from last year, but we served about 1,700. And I'm working on those numbers, but it was a bunch, and we only have 1 deputy that does that. Everything else is done through our jail folks and our patrol folks. The coroner scene investigation is a unique, standalone, siloed unit within our agency. They actually, we say CSI, but most people think of CSI as crime scene investigation, which we also do in our investigations, but this is coroner scene. So every county has to have a coroner. Every county's coroner has to sign off on all unattended deaths. And that coroner is statutorily required to run his or her own investigation alongside any criminal investigation. So if a person is found deceased, our deputies or detectives would come out and do their investigation. The coroner scene investigations would come out and do their own alongside. They can share information, but they are separate and independent. And this is the coroner scene right now is exclusively a civilian staff. And we're extremely lucky. We have some former paramedics from LDCFM who work for us and some folks who just really enjoy doing this work, and we're glad to have them. But this is something that we actually took on in 2021, probably when the Lawrence Douglas County Fire and Medical actually stopped doing it. And in order to keep the response time low and the investigations a little more succinct, we actually stepped in instead of having the coroner from Kansas City form their own unit, which could have been hours waiting for them to get there. Our administration is downtown, which is me and Stacy and the rest of some of the command staff. And then our IT, which is a huge, I don't need to tell you all, but IT is a big deal. But our IT is also responsible for the ECC. So they are also doing dispatches IT as well. I threw this in. Our dive team is kind of unique. It's a multi-agency team. We have firefighters and police officers from Lawrence and other agencies, as well as deputies. The dive team specifically is a underwater search and recovery. This is not a rescue unit. We do not go out and try to rescue people. The only time we are called is when it's too late. And so we are there to recover. As of this past year, we actually began a boat patrol for Clinton Lake. They had said that State Park had 643,000 visitors last year. I thought that number was a little low, just judging by the cars and the number of people I see out there all the time. The marina has become a huge influx of people because they're building it up. They're making a big deal out of it. It's very well received, but they're having a lot of Friday night events, concerts. They're expanding, and it's become just kind of this thing. And as I've talked about in the past, the state simply just does not have the resources or does not allocate the resources to Douglas County and Clinton Lake to cover this. So we have had to step into this position, and we're doing something that we've never done before. We purchased a boat last year. We've certified six folks to go out on the water. And I'm just here to tell you, we are not out there to enforce so much as be a presence. We are the wave and say hi folks, but if you need something, we're also there for you. But we're not out there to really get after how many fishing lines you have in the water. Are you using the right kind of hooks and that kind of stuff? That is not really within our lane, but we are out there and present. The dive team is currently housed in a separate building over by Hallmark Cards, which costs us roughly $30,000 a year. When we finish the PSB, we will be able to move everything out of that building and into our own, which is a pretty substantial savings. Our corrections division, obviously you all know where that's at, out on the east end of town. I guess I didn't finish my numbers. The average daily population last year was right around, I think it was 152. Our jail is a 186 bed, and you've all heard me talk about this ad nauseum. 186, but 77 of our beds are not behind a locked door. So, and with the makeup of our current jail population, it's very difficult to house them safely. And so our functional full is right around 135, in my opinion. It can anywhere deflect, but it really depends on the types and the severity of the inmates and the cases that they are in there on. We have our booking division there, as well as releases. They had 3,400 bookings. Now, those are not 3,400 people. Those are 34 individual bookings. If one person was booked 100 times last year, that would be in there. It's not unique individuals. Court liaison and data entry. We take people from our jail to court. We scribe all of the information. We bring it back. We put it into our systems to make sure that our release dates, our updates, next court dates, all that stuff is correct. We do all of that for not only district court, but also for municipal court, which takes up, and we have 2 people that are basically assigned to do that every day, all day. We have a transport division within the jail. They did 417 inmate transports. That may just be to the eye doctor here in town, or that may be to Larned State Hospital, Norton Correctional, anywhere across the state. I wish I could have gotten you the number of miles that we put on, but it was a boatload, I believe is the technical term, last year. We also have the reentry unit. We've talked ad nauseum about them and the wonderful work they do, but the skinny is they work with people who are in jail to try to make sure that they have the best chance when they transition out of jail to be successful. They help them with clothing, IDs and birth certificates, jobs, housing, all those kinds of things. And they do that work while they're in jail in anticipation of letting them out, hoping that we can try to shock the system and get them into a new rhythm, as opposed to sending them back out into the same environment expecting a different result. Our Burt Nash mental health unit, that is a contracted unit that is embedded within our jail. They are a 5-person team, I believe. And they are the ones that I like to tell everybody that you're gonna have to pry them from my cold, dead, icy fingers. They are the greatest thing that in the 27 years I've been here, they're the best thing that's happened to that facility, in my opinion. But they have their own office, and they are unique, and they are standalone, and they're fantastic. But they work with the population that is incarcerated to help them through their mental health crises, but also to help get them stood up and on a path for recovery, or at least to get them stabilized so they can get through the not only being in jail, but also get them through the court process. Our medical unit, obviously, we have another contract that we have in care 24/7 or in-house 24/7 medical availability. Our kitchen is unique in that most jails have gone to a pre-purchased, pre-packaged standalone. They get a shipment every day for all the meals for the day. They heat them up and hand them out, whereas we actually cook the meals. So, and we have continued to do this because it's the best way for us to continue to have a work program for the folks who are incarcerated, who can come and work in the jail kitchen. And for every 8 hours, what is it? For every 8 hours, they get 1 day off of their sentence. Or if they're just paying off fines, they can get $8 an hour towards their fine, I believe. So again, another number I wish I could have gotten for you is how many days we served or we were able to scrape off of their sentence by having them work and get something done, but also just have the work experience. Education completion. We have folks who just want to get their GED and their diploma completion. And we have a teacher that works full time and she's been extremely successful. If you are in and you work for 3 months and then get out and don't do any work on the outside, but find yourself back inside, you can pick up right where you left off. She's been extremely good about that. And she has a whole wall full of graduates. Our training division is out there. That is for both operations and corrections, but they mainly run the biggest thing that they do is run our Corrections Academy, which is an 8-week program for new hire jail staff. And so they go through an academy for 8 weeks before they even hit the floors with a training officer. I think we're about one or two agencies in the state that actually does that. And then again, IT, that's me, and that's it. So I stand for questions. I have some extra numbers if anybody would like them, but I'm more than happy to. Without too much. Okay.
Thank you, Sheriff. Why don't we do questions for the sheriff real quick before we turn to DA?
You have to come to the podium, Stan. Sorry,
Sign in.
I'm not gonna sign in. Sorry, I'm a little slow. I just wanted to point out the sheriff provides meals to the JDC youth weekends and evenings.
Okay, if there's no questions for the sheriff, or I'll turn it over to District Attorney Loomis.
Just share screen.
Yep.
There you go. Before I start, I would be remiss not to follow up on a couple of things that Sheriff Armbruster said from my experience over the last 10 years working with the Sheriff's Department. The reentry unit there has provided my clients over the last 10 years with invaluable resources. I can't count the number of times, and still now as a district attorney, I'm talking with reentry on a weekly basis, helping find solutions for folks who are in either housing, mental health issues, medications. So I'm continuing that relationship with the reentry unit. They've been a huge growth for the jail. When I started here, they were not up and running the way they are now. And I would also put in a plug for the inmate worker program. The number of folks of mine who got valuable work experience, who got to do something in custody I think gave them worth while also working off their fines and sentences, has been a huge, huge factor in getting people back on their feet when they get out of the custody. So having the inmate worker program, getting them out of custody with skills and without debt over their head has been a huge deal too. So I want to thank the sheriff for keeping that program in place as well. Jay's been here for 27 years. I've been here for 27 days about. So a lot of this update is really where we're headed right now. I'm not going to read you the vision statement. You can read it for yourself, but the goal here really is to restore trust in this office, treat everyone with fairness and dignity, and do things that are, I think, the best way to put it, keep in mind everyone's rights from victims to defendants while making sure that we're keeping the public safe throughout the entire process. That's something that, as I introduced you to earlier, Lisa Moore has been working on from day one since she's been here. Her background, she does have a background in criminal justice as well. She worked in the victim witness unit in Shawnee County with me, is trained on any number of skills, but including trauma-informed care, all things that we're bringing to the office now to make sure that when we're dealing with folks who are impacted by the justice system, regardless of how, that we are treating them with respect and making sure that they have a voice throughout the process. So this is what I want to talk about a little bit today, some staffing changes, operational overview, some of the technology issues that we are currently dealing with or learning about. Like I said, victim-centered services, and finally, some future considerations. This is the management team we have right now on the ops side. Mary Morales Glasscock is here. She's my executive assistant. She may not be my executive assistant for that much longer. We might have to change her title because she's doing so much work. And so she may be taking on a number of other responsibilities with the new title. We'll see. But Lisa and Mary joined me when I came in the office. That's kind of the operational side. There's also been 3 new hires on the prosecution side. I think many of you know Eve Kemple. She was here for roughly 15 years. Previously, she's now back from the AG's office. To be very clear, William Skepnick is not Bill Skepnick. Will is Bill's son, so he is not suing the county right now. But he was by the AG's office for the last 7 years, and he's now joined us and is working with Jason McElrath, who is a senior assistant attorney. Jason comes to us from Shawnee County, and Jason and Will are now overseeing our misdemeanor dockets, getting those stood up. It's where the vast majority of our cases are, between misdemeanor and traffic. And so Jason and Will have been charged with getting those stood up here over the next 6 months, because one of the things that we've been dealing with from an operations perspective is trying to get a handle on the cases and the backlog of cases we have. Roughly right now, we have about 600 backlog cases that need to have charge decisions made on them. To give you a sense, we roughly charge 1,200 cases a year for criminal. Traffic is about twice that. And then there's also juvenile, which is a couple hundred cases a year for juvenile. We have SYNC and care and treatment cases, but both of those are more on the civil side than the criminal side. Katie Britton oversees all of that in our office. She is the chief prosecutor for SYNC and over CT, as well as truancies. So we're currently going through figuring out how this office runs, the processes that were put in place, making changes to policies and procedures, updating those. And then a lot of this is going to be just figuring out how cases come into the office and get pushed through the office. And so we're also, a big thing that's been occurring over the last 2 months is working with outside providers, working with county partners, be it IT, HR, the sheriff's department, law enforcement, to reestablish some of the relationships that were not in good standing upon me taking office. So that includes setting up bi-weekly meetings with all the chiefs of police for in the county, as well as the sheriff. So we're meeting now regularly with KUPD, Lawrence Police Department, Eudora, Baldwin City, and the Sheriff's Department. So that's in a bi-weekly meeting so that we can all get together, discuss issues, troubleshoot, or bring to attention each agency things that may be coming up. We're also now working with Lawrence Police Department and expanding that, I think, to every other agency, a SVU meeting. So we meet with law enforcement investigators to discuss special victim cases, make charging decisions, discuss investigations and follow-up information that were needed. So reestablishing those relationships is a big part of what we're working on currently. And then all of this relies upon our technology. We have a case management system. It's called PBK. It's Prosecutor by Carpel. If I could probably spend the next 10 days talking to you about what that system can and cannot do. and I don't know much about it. So it's an important integral part of our system, how we prosecute, how we bring cases in. So when the sheriff's department sends us an affidavit, it comes into that system. We distribute it out to our prosecutors through that system. Everything we do on the legal side works through that system. It's a case management. So from A to Z, soup to nuts, that is what we have to use to track data, to track cases through the system, communicate about the cases from a note perspective. All emails, all texts, phone calls are tracked in that system or should be. And so these are the things that we're working through right now, is getting up to speed on that system, and then also working with our outside agencies like the CJCC to make sure we can get them the data they need from our system, that we're tracking the right things that we need to make sure that the community is notified and can be made aware of all the work that we're doing in a digestible fashion, that we're tracking the numbers that the CJCC needs to track and wants to track for public consumption. All of that is what we're working with through PBK. I think next month we'll be sending 3, 4, or 5 people to St. Louis for PBK continued training. One of the issues that I'm sure the sheriff would speak about this as well, it's a great length, is technology in the field is impacting technology in the courtroom and storage in the DA's office. Discovery 20 years ago was mostly paper reports, some calls, video from scene, photos from scene. It did not include 27 body cams from every single officer who showed up at scene. So managing that influx of data is really one of the main things that we're working on today in our system, because we're finding, both from a cost perspective, there's a real cost to storing some of this data, and just from a management and use perspective, there's an inability to use our systems at its best capacity if it's full of all these videos. We're trying to figure out how best to clean out our system while still maintain its integrity and complying with all of our discovery requests. To give you a sense of how much, we have 44 terabytes of video in our system right now. That is not how much data we actually have. That's just what needs to be cleaned out from videos that have been dumped into the system. We probably have, I don't know, in the last 4 or 5 years, 10x that, if not more, in terms of video and data that we have to store as part of the process for cases, and then maintain cases for appeal or any other challenges that come down the road. As I said, creating a victim-centered process is one of the things that we're working on currently. We've just are in the process of making some changes to policies on that, updating policies. We have both a VOCA and a VAWA position in our office. VOCA is the Victims of Crime Act. So it's monies that are for a dedicated victim witness specialist who works directly with certain subsets, almost all, in this case, domestic violence victims, some stalking, as well in interlapse. And then the VAWA grant is the Violence Against Women Act, and that can cover sexual violence, domestic violence, and stalking cases as well. And so we're in the process of trying to hire that person. From a staffing perspective, we have 15.4 full-time attorneys in the budget. Right now, we're at 13 full-time attorneys plus myself. So we're still trying to add a couple more folks to our overall team on the attorney side. I think we are only short 1 full-time employee on our operations side right now. And we really did have very little turnover on the operations side when we came into office, which has been a huge, huge help. Interact with a lot of that staff who I think are very much wanting to work towards the shared goals we have, and have been really integral for us to learn about the systems and move forward on them. So we've been talking with them about victim-centered services. A lot of that was going on before. What we're doing, I think, is improving upon that, making sure that's centered in our practice, and making sure that when we're meeting with outside agencies, they're aware of that is a primary concern of ours as well. We just met with the Attorney General's office to go over new procedures and policies for victim witness management. I think the goal is to bring them in to do an office-wide training. Their victim witness coordinator has about 20 years experience out of Ford County and Ford and Finney County. And so say what you will about anyone else in that office. She's a real boon of experience, has been working with us throughout this process, actually since before I took office. So a lot of what we're doing right now is also trying to get stood back up. Some of the other things that this commission just helped us get stood back up, including the Property Crimes Compensation Board. I think we just had 2 folks approved for that board in the last month. And so we had about a year without a functioning board, which means we have a year's worth of applications that are now going to get processed. It means that there's a lot of folks who will never recover monetarily from the person who committed the crime against them, but they can make an application here in the county and get funding back. So we're working to make sure that those people who have submitted those applications get their cases heard and get before the board as quickly as possible as well. These are sort of the things that we're working on right now in a maybe a more global sense, which is, again, still recruiting experienced prosecutors. As I said, we have some openings still. I've been meeting with potential candidates. The Deputy District Attorney Greenwald has been meeting with potential candidates. We're actively recruiting. We're also then, as of this afternoon, we were talking about the evaluation of needs for additional operational staff, where we have needs for more staff for, be it administrative assistant work, victim witness service work, investigation work. We really have, I would say, 4 buckets of folks in the office. You have the attorneys, you have trial assistants or legal assistants, you have victim witness specialists, and we have 2 investigators who go out and serve subpoenas and find folks, do criminal history background checks, things like that. And so those 4 groups, we're always trying to figure out if we need more, less folks or shift folks from one position to another depending on needs of the office. But that is what we're currently going through, is evaluating our needs, because we do not, in day 60, we don't have a full accounting of all the time and work that's being done in the office yet. There's obviously a budget consideration for all of that. You're all very well aware of it. And then trying to figure out technological needs and training needs. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is ensuring that our staff is able to go to trainings, both to become better attorneys, better legal assistants, better victim witness specialists, you name it. And that's why for this PBK training coming up in April, we're really trying to send as many folks as possible so we can work internally to better create data, better track the cases, and better serve the people we're working with on a day-to-day basis using our case management system. But those are the things we're looking at right now. In all honesty, there's about 7,000 other things we're looking at, and I'm happy to take any questions about that. There's a lot of work to be done in this office right now. I do feel every day we're learning more, and it's 2 steps forward, 9 steps back, 15 steps forward, you go sideways. But there's always all these fires, all these issues. But I think I've been incredibly heartened by how much support I've received and our staff has received since coming into office, be it from law enforcement, the county, outside partners, the CJCC, you name the group. Everyone's been more than willing to work with us and has lend a hand. So while we're still learning on the job, everyone we've worked with has made our lives far easier than they maybe we deserve to have had our lives made. But I really can't stress how much I appreciate the work that everyone else has been doing with us. So if anyone has any other questions for me, I'm happy to answer those from here or sit down and talk with you guys too.
Commissioners, any questions for DA, or we can go back to the sheriff?
Yeah, I had a question, Dakota. I think you touched on it in your presentation, but of the 13 staff members you currently have, how many of those turned over when you came into office?
So the current staff members, if you want to include myself, there's 6 new staff as of today who are in the district attorney's office. Those were the folks we put up on the board. So the district attorney, our chief of staff, executive assistant, and then the 3 attorneys, Will, Eve, and Jason. So between the 3 people in the room here, me, Lisa, and Mary, and then our 3 attorneys, those are 6 new staff members. We had some folks leave in December of this year that were planned. I think Kathy Reyes had been here since 1985. She is retiring. Ted Barrett, who's a charging attorney, he is set to retire for the last couple of years in December. And then we had a couple of folks who took new jobs. 3 attorneys took new jobs. 2 back in there where they were in Miami County, one lived in Miami County, went back to Miami County under new administration. Another went back to Kansas City, Missouri, where they lived, to the same office they'd been in before. And our 3rd attorney went to the Department of Commerce to work over there with Bob North. And then finally, we had two staff who did not come over on the transition with us, one on the operations side and one on the attorney side. So of the folks who didn't come over, most of those were either retirements or people who had found new jobs throughout the process.
So how many stayed?
So how many stayed? Attorneys, there were 3 attorneys left out of the 13 they had on staff at the time. And then for operations, every operations member but Kathy Reyes, who retired in December, stayed. But we did not, there was 1 operations member who didn't come over during the transition. So everyone stayed through the end of the prior administration, and then only 1 operation member didn't come over after the transition.
I was just curious about the software that you spent some time talking about. Is that the system that was just purchased in the last few years? So it's relatively new to the office. You mentioned that sorry, I'm seeing a lot of head nods, so I'm moving on. Sorry, I mean, I'm seeing affirmative head nods for those of you listening. Are you familiar at all with whatever system existed before? Because I heard you say that you're not super familiar with this one. You're working to learn that. You have an upcoming training. I'm just curious what you know about apples to oranges comparison.
Sure. The case management system prior to PBK being implemented was Full Court. I'd worked with Full Court some when I was in a prosecution office back in Shawnee County. The case management system we worked with was Justware, which is more similar to Full Court than it is to PBK. In full disclosure, Justware, I used that 15 years ago. So there have been a lot of new developments. The biggest one for PBK compared to some of these other systems, it's cloud-based. It's something you can access on any computer from anywhere, basically. And Starla and the IT department have been incredibly helpful in getting us up and running on that and helping us understand some of the tools that are involved with PBK or some of the power that it has from a data perspective that we weren't aware of. But this case management systems, as far as these go, this probably is one of the 3 or 4 bigger case management systems in the country that's being used, and a lot of the use is out of the Midwest. Carpel is out of Minnesota. There's a lot of people in Kansas who use it. And so we have a lot of peers and colleagues who we can go to discuss. It's one of the things that Lisa and Mary have been working on, is getting contacts with the folks who have been running the system for a lot longer than we have, so figure out how best to utilize it, set it up. I also think just today, Katie Fitzgerald and I were talking about it because she and Mary were going to reach out to the PBK guru in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so there's a network of folks who it's easier to work with PBK because you have a lot of resources, both internally from them and then externally from other users who coordinate and share information. But there's a lot to learn. And then I think it's been in place really since October of 22 is when it went live. So the contract would have been from, I think, late 21 maybe is when it was agreed upon.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. And I can't really remember what the initial term of that contract was. It sounds like you generally think that it's a positive and good system, just a bit of a deep learning curve. But part of my follow-up question you just answered was that, like, are there other nearby counties, other peers that use it, know it, might have a longer time experience with it and be able to help figure out some of those data storage challenges and costs? I mean, because if it's cloud-based and the amount of data that you're storing, that's certainly a direct tie to how much you're paying, I assume.
There are, and one of the things that we're working through is that the case management system, the PBK system, and then our discovery system, which all the law enforcement agencies use at this point, the Axon Justice system. Axon Justice gives us unlimited storage, but it also integrates with PBK. So we should be able to store all of our discovery in Axon without any cost to us from PBK. And PBK doesn't want us to store stuff in their system. It doesn't help them. There's a charge to it, which they'll gladly take our money for, but they'd rather we not have it in there because it's a hassle for them as well. So one of the things that we're working with, and one of the reasons why we want to send folks to St. Louis for the PBK training, that one of the real big reasons is we want to be able to meet with their staff at some of their training sessions, but really there's a lot of one-on-one sessions you can do there to figure out exactly how we can disaggregate all of the discovery out of PBK and save, I mean, at this point, it'd be $22,000, $23,000 a year, because that's what the storage for PBK costs us, that is also being stored on Axon. There's always gonna be some stuff in PBK, but like PDFs, some photos and things like that, probably. But the vast majority of our storage is gonna be video and phones. So when you take an entire phone and dump it down into the system, that takes a lot of storage. And so keeping those in Axon saves us a lot of money, and I think helps us better use the system too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that further explanation and appreciate your diligence in trying to figure out how to maximize the capacity without throwing money at it. Sheriff Armbruster, I'm curious to know a little bit more about the boat patrol.
Yeah, me too.
So, we're the money people here. So I just have to ask, was that a request that sort of came your way from Kansas Wildlife and Parks or Kansas? I assume that's the authority that really doesn't have the ability to have their own patrol out
Right.
there, as it were. Is that a request that came to you all, or is it something that you were responsive to based on lots of calls that
Sure.
were happening?
Yeah, no, it was, well, first off, the Clinton Lake is unique in it that has a state side and a federal side. What I'll be talking about is specifically the state side, which is the state parks, Kansas Wildlife and Parks. And they have basically game wardens, but then they also have enforcement officers. Both of those folks can access, they have a boat there, they can access as they can go out on the lake and enforce laws and whatnot. Where we got involved was the fact that during the summer, during the evenings, weekends, and pretty much any time, we were getting calls for people who are stranded or incidents that were occurring and the state simply didn't have anybody available, or there was just no way to get somebody there. So what we were having to do is we were having to rely on citizens who were either coming in and out, putting their boat in or taking their boat out, and ask them to either go out and help a boater who was stranded or take us out to an emergency situation. And so in the discussions with the state about how we are not Perry Lake. Perry Lake is huge. It's a huge deal. And so a lot of resources get sent up there, but we are slowly becoming a destination with the implementation of this new marina and all of their programs, which is great. But we were seeing an influx of not only just calls for service, but just the need to be present, and it just wasn't being covered, but it was falling to us once things had gone bad. So we took more of an offensive role in the fact that we felt like we owed it to the people who were in our county to take care of them.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate a little bit more context. So if I'm tracking right, it sounds like what you said earlier, there's a cost in the investment of the boat that was purchased for use, but you're training current patrol staff, is that correct? So it's not about adding new positions, it's that will be one of the patrol assignments on any given shift seasonally.
Yes. So in fact, we're even trying to not, yes, so you're absolutely correct. The boat purchase, and then we sent 3 people down to South Texas to be trained as trainers. They came back, they then trained our entire patrol division. And we don't even really, and we're trying to avoid even doing like specialty shifts or overtime to add any additional costs. We are simply have the ability to get out there if we need, but if we have the staffing to do it, then we will send somebody out to be present and be on the water.
Thank you both for your presentation. This question might be for the both of you because I heard you, maybe, yes. Dakota, I heard you say that you've set up new touch points with KUPD, Baldwin, Eudora, Lawrence. So I don't know if that also includes the sheriff. In those new touch points, I'm curious about what you're hearing. If you're hearing concerns or challenges, if you're hearing positive kudos. And so could you inform the commission? Are there opportunities for the commission to engage? Or is there anything that the commission should be informed about?
Sure. And I think we've had 2 meetings now, so there's not been a ton of discussion. And in full disclosure, and Jay can confirm this, I did most of the talking. So it's more of me transmitting to law enforcement what our office is going to be doing going forward, and maybe some of the stuff that we may need from them. But I can give you kind of a general overview of the topics that I brought up that I was concerned about, and I think were shared concerns from law enforcement. A lot of it goes back to communication and just reopening channels of communication between our office, our staff, and then law enforcement staff, be it on discovery issues, case management, case prosecution, so subpoenas, preparing officers or deputies for testimony, working with them to better investigate cases. We can't direct any of the investigations, but oftentimes there's reasons why we can't charge something. So being more communicative about what we need to be able to reconsider charges and working with law enforcement about that. Some of the Giglio, Brady issues, and making sure that we're all on the same page about those policies and making sure we're following all of our responsibilities and duties as far as those go. I think some of the stuff that we talked about, again, goes back to just policy and procedures about how we can best run cases and how we can best protect resources. From a county perspective, I'm not sure there's anything that we've discussed so far that would implicate the county commission, be it from a policy, budgetary standpoint. I do think one of the things that, and I can speak to this from being the Baldwin City attorney and working with Chief Patrick down there, so I got to see a small slice of this. I've been really encouraged, really since I started working in Baldwin City, with the cooperation between law enforcement agencies. So be it Baldwin City and Sheriff's Department working together, or the Lawrence Police Department, KU, and the Sheriff's Department working together on things. I've been in localities before where the idea of agencies communicating was laughable. I see here the fact that we've already restarted meetings, already restarted communication, and all the folks who were at those meetings want to share information, want to learn from each other, and then also are willing to help me learn and figure out what the best practices is for our office to deal with their respective officers and deputies has been a real boon for me. I'm sure at some point there'll be something I'm going to need from the commission about that, but right now it's been just really helpful to learn from our law enforcement partners, and also I think just to reestablish the fact that we're all really on the same team, working towards the same goals, share the same motivations, which I think is something that needed to be reestablished right now.
Thank you. And so in that process, have you, because you mentioned shared goals. I know you mentioned shared goals with the victim-centered services. So are you going through like a similar process with some of your other operational objectives and like creating shared goals with like some of your other partners and then maybe tracking some of those shared goals?
Yeah, that's a really good question because the tracking part of that is that you can create goals all day long.
You can.
And then tracking them tells you if you're actually following through with them, right? So we've met with community corrections, court services, met with the courts numerous times, meeting with them again in a couple of days. Outside partners, the Child Advocacy Center. And right now we're in the information gathering stage of all this, where we're trying to figure out what their needs are, where we touch their offices or where we come into contact with them and what they would need. So a good example, we're working with the courts right now to re-implement weekend charging. And this is something that the sheriff and I had discussed previously as well, because it impacts his staff and his bottom line directly. For the last roughly 4 years, maybe 3.5 years, there's not been weekend charging, which means if you get arrested on a Friday night, you're sitting there, you might have a judge might make a determination about probable cause, but you're sitting there until Monday, and then the DA's office oftentimes would say, oh, we're not going to file charges on this. So you've created a 2 or 3 day disruption to someone's life. You don't file charges against them, but they've now been in custody for 72 hours where the sheriff's department has limited bed space. Their officers would be much happier if folks are going to be, if they're not going to be charged or released immediately, and so that they're not taking up the time of the officers. And frankly, from my perspective, if we're not going to charge somebody, keeping them in custody for another 48, 24 hours does real damage to them in the community. And so we're reinstituting that. The judges want it to be reinstituted. I think law enforcement does. We do, because we can make better charging decisions up front. We can get more information to the courts so that they can make better decisions about bond as well. Without our input, they have what they have. When they see an affidavit and they make a charging or a PC decision about that. But those are the things that we were talking about in these meetings, and sort of like the concerns that our partners have regarding both. I think and this is a good example of it. This is not just a government efficiency issue. It's not just a cost saving issue. It's really about how we're treating our community members, how we're treating the people that come into our custody, which is a serious responsibility. And oftentimes people would, like, Lord, I've heard this as a defense attorney a ton, which is like a couple of days in jail. It's what's 2 or 3 days in jail. And I'd say until you've spent 2 or 3 days in jail, you don't know what that looks like, where you have animals at home, you have a job that you're going to miss now, you have loved ones who don't know where you are. It's all that stuff together. So getting a charging decision for some of these folks immediately and getting them out of custody if we're not going to charge them with any crimes makes sense for a whole lot of reasons. But really, it comes down to just being a decent steward and decent human being to get them out of custody if we're not going to charge them with anything.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I can add to that too. Just I've communicated with a lot of the community providers, and after coming in, still working on connecting with everyone, learning who everyone is. But one thing I've heard pretty consistently is wanting to have better responses from staff, more timely responses, hearing back from people. So we've been backtracking that and looking at our phone system, how we're operating the front desk, because the volume of calls is very high at the front desk. So wanting to make sure that we have good support. We have a phenomenal operational team. I mean, they've just been incredible. Probably the most skilled team I've ever joined. So working with them to understand that workflow better so that they can have the ability to respond and make sure they're providing good information, and the information is coming all the way around from, attorney to trial assistant to victim witness. And so just working on the internal communication and processes to make sure that when people call in, understanding it's probably the worst day of their life. And we want to make sure we're providing that like trauma-informed response and able to respond as quickly as possible. And everyone's been very open and wanting to have that same goal, which is, I think, one of the shared goals that everyone has had is like, we want to feel more connected and we want to feel like there's good communication. So that's one of the things that seems small on the operational side, like, well, what happens when you call in and where are those calls going and how are we tracking? But just doing that piece has really been helpful for everyone to understand like ways we can improve.
Yeah. And these are great goals that are empathetic and to build trust with our community. And so as you finalize the goals and align on the goals with your community partners, do you have a plan to publish those goals on a website and then to track those goals so that community members and or partners can also publish and there's community awareness of your goals?
Yeah, I think the goal here, and this is part of what we're working with. I think we want to be there's things we'll be doing internally on our own, and things that we'll be doing as part of the team with CJCC to make sure that we're sharing all our data with that team, so the public has kind of a one-stop shop for that, if you will. There's some things that visions, goals that we can share with the public so that they're aware of what our priorities are. And then we can work with our partners to make sure that that information, that data is getting put out in one place. So when you go to look for information about the jail, you're finding information about how long people are being, how long does it take for someone to get charged? How long is someone, how long is the case pendency? How many cases are being diverted? And with that, what types of cases, whose cases, all that kind of information, that's easier to gather. The other thing that I think we were talking about is, and internally, is there are a lot of internal markers that might not be for public consumption in terms of, turnaround times, contacts with victims, things like that. But at the same time, as long as we are not sharing any confidential information, there's a lot of that information that I think would be helpful for the public to understand too. And so that's part of this process we're going through right now, is identifying how best to implement the policies that we have, and then tracking those both for our internal purposes to see if we're meeting our goals and meeting the standards that we're setting, and then potentially to be sharing those with the public to say, in 2025, we had 17,000 contacts with victims or witnesses in cases. And so that in person, phone, text, whatever those are, which is all trackable in PPK. So if we're doing our job on the data side too, we can follow up with that and make that available to the public. So I think that's part of all the overarching goals here, is to be more transparent and share that. Also, and I'll say this, like, the data is only as good as what we're putting into it. So we're still in the process of going back and trying to restore some of the data integrity of the system we have in place right now. And with a new system, that's going to happen with any new system. I think you have the number of checkboxes and the number of different tags you can put onto things quickly creates downstream effects where you're not sure how you're tracking things. But we are working through that slowly but surely, so to make sure that going forward, the data is accurate, and then we can, over time, shore up the back-end data that was there previously.
Yeah, I would just add that this is an excellent prequel to the presentation of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council strategic plan, which is all around data. So that's coming to you, I think, early next month.
Getting close to the end of the time here, so I'll try to keep this short. I'm happy to hear that you filled a lot of your open positions, but one of the things I think as a commission we look at is compensation levels. And are you finding your compensation levels are attracting the candidates that you hope to fill those positions? Is that a concern that you have? I mean, that's something the sheriff sort of alluded to. You have any impressions on that? Maybe Lisa, I'm not quite sure who to direct that to.
I'm happy to answer about the compensation. So I think the difference, we've come in through, well, I guess in a few days, there'll be the market raise, and then the merit raise will soon follow after that, after the McGrath study that changed, I think, levels of compensation for some of the folks. So since I got elected, I think there'll be 3 separate changes to people's pay in the first 5 months or so that I've even been aware of any of this stuff. Compensation levels for attorneys is difficult because I think we rightly did a McGrath study, made some changes. At the same time, Wyandotte and Shawnee were doing some of the same work. And that's, I think the sheriff's office can speak more, they have more competition. There's more offices that they're competing with staff, because there's more municipalities that are hiring lots of law enforcement officers. But it's a very competitive environment right now for attorneys. Because we are not full capacity, it's easier, I think, to be able to compensate folks at the level needed to get them in. The minute we get to full staffing, that's going to be a very difficult thing to do. There's also the amount of turnover that's going on in the prosecution. I mean, I just came back from a conference, an NDA conference, where one of the three key points there was recruitment and retention, and it's across the country, it's an issue. But one of the things that was discussed was lots of alternatives to compensation that help in terms of recruiting folks and keeping them engaged as well. So we're looking at, don't get me wrong, I will take every single compensation dollar I can get, but there's a lot of other ways that we can be creative to augment those and to help people feel like they would want to work here, even if the compensation isn't exactly the same as Johnson County, which frankly, it's just not going to be. I don't have any delusions about that. But there are things we can do from benefits and work-life balance, things like that, that can help with us that. And the conference I came back from had a lot of good ideas about that. It's just a matter of, at some point, there's also just a limited number of attorneys in Kansas, generally speaking. If you go past Highway 81, there's really, I mean, there are counties without a single attorney in it at this point. So working with that situation, we're going to have to, there's some challenges for us. I will say though, on the operations side, I think staff have been, after McGrath and after the last couple bumps, they're being compensated more equitably and more fairly. It's just very difficult, I think, based upon the pay range that we're looking at and the skill sets that a lot of the folks in our office have, to say that the compensation is fair for them, especially living in Lawrence. If they're going to live in Lawrence, it's just a tough sell sometimes for folks to tell them you're working all this time. You can't work overtime, but you have more work than you could ever handle. But the compensation on this is nowhere near what we're compensating attorneys who have a lot of other flexibilities and luxuries that you might not have as an operations staff member. So working through that and trying to be mindful of that and respectful of that is something that we're working with internally to better compensate and better, more fairly treat, I think, the operations staff who often get kind of the short end of the stick when it comes to compensation.
Well, we have a very specific of the VAWA position for our domestic violence prosecutor. And I think that's such a specific skill set. And those cases are really important because of the recidivism, like how often those cases come back, and wanting to have someone really skilled in understanding domestic violence. And so I really think that position specifically, we need to look at that compensation to make sure we have someone who has that experience, because that position in every county and probably every state has a high turnover. It's a difficult position. You're dealing with a lot of secondary trauma. So that's one I think needs special consideration to figure out how are we going to recruit and get that position filled as soon as possible because of the need, and also because it is a grant funded position.
Another staffing question. If this is in the weeds, let me know. But so I got to sit in on first appearances on Monday, and the district attorney's office was represented by, I believe, an intern. And I was just curious if that is the goal or if this is part of that staffing capacity.
It's part of the staffing capacity. It's also, we have a very, very, very good intern class right now. Really a pretty remarkable intern class. That's nothing to do with me. They were hired on before I got there. They've been a real breath of fresh air. And so on Monday, if you're there for Monday first appearances, I'm not sure if that was Britt who was doing them. I'm trying to remember if it was Liz, but whoever was handling, like, I trust them to do that, and we wouldn't put them there if we didn't trust them to do that. That being said, it makes far more sense for us to have a charging attorney who is dedicated to doing the charging and then shows up at first appearances and has gone from the beginning of the case, charged it, knows the case facts. Oftentimes we'll know if this is someone they've seen for the 7th or 8th time, some of the case history there, some of the personal history there, and has a relationship with law enforcement to be able to reach out to them before first appearances in case we need, and which is something this is something we've talked about with law enforcement recently and have been implementing. But we were being much more mindful of having law enforcement at first appearances should we need to address the court about specific bond issues that we can't as attorneys know we can't speak to factually. We weren't there. We don't have that information. But I know we've had probably 3 or 4 times now in the last couple of weeks, officers over. I know on the Gridley matter, there was an officer who came over to be able to testify about should we got into a contested argument about bond. And a lot of that is only occurring because we have attorneys who are now finally reaching out and talking to law enforcement beforehand. Interns, I think it's an unreasonable expectation for them as they take on all these other responsibilities to also know who to talk to at each agency and have a relationship with them to make sure they can come over and do those things too.
Well, thank you all for being here. We appreciate your time, and we've come to the end of our work session. We will adjourn into our 5:30 business meeting.